Hello Internet, and today is going to be the second day of Top 7 in 7 days. This is being held by Book Rose. She has invited other booktubers to join her, and today's topic is going to be thought-provoking books. Of course, I'm limiting myself to books that I've read in 2017, so these are ones that have been more recent in my mind. So we're gonna get right to it. Book number 1 is going to be the Harry Potter series. I love Harry Potter, and Harry Potter opened my mind to just the idea of thinking about a book. Like, one of my favorite parts about the Harry Potter series is just how invested I became in it, invested I am in it, and the fact that I come up with so many theories of why things are happening, reasons for different plot holes, trying to figure out how to cover up those plot holes, and it's just become a part of my life. It's so natural to me to constantly think about different Harry Potter things, think about different characters, think about how different things apply to my life nowadays. One of my favorite habits being a college student is taking lessons that I've been taught in class and in my courses, especially if they're philosophical, and trying to find a Harry Potter parallel. I think it's rather hilarious that a book meant for children can teach you just as much as a college course in which you have to pay thousands of dollars for. So that is definitely thought-provoking for me. So book number 2 is A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I read this book and I fell so in love with it. This is about a crew on this ship called the Wayfarer. They all come from different backgrounds, they are different species, and they're currently on this trip to tunnel a hole from one point in the universe to another to make the journey just a little bit shorter. So we hear a lot of philosophy, a lot of different politics, a lot of different ideas of what right and wrong is. We see conversations on AI, we see conversations on culture, what one culture perceives as bad, another culture doesn't, and the reasons for these sort of things, the reasons for this. So there's a lot of conversations going on. I loved every character and how they related to each other, how their experiences played into each other, and it made me think a lot. Like, one point in this book, they point out something about the human race. This girl called Sixus, she is a lizard type creature, and she points out a difference between her race and the human race and how they simply think differently about who's important and the importance of a person who is experienced versus the importance of a person who just has the potential to do something, and how different their concept of that is from the human concept. And that was just so fascinating. So this really made me think about, like, just how we perceive different things and how to relate to others, even if we don't have the same definitions for concepts, right? So even if we have different definitions, even if we have different ways of thinking, how to relate to each other in spite of that. Book number 3 is no surprise to any who watch me, and that is We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutcherson. This is a book about a boy who has been abducted by the aliens for the past 3 years. He's now 16, and he is told by these aliens that there's only 144 days left and the world will be destroyed. However, he has a chance to push one button that will save the whole world. So throughout these 144 days, he's trying to figure out whether or not the world is worth saving. And in his opinion, it really isn't. And he asked different people their opinions and all sorts of stuff. My favorite part about this book was how it treated depression, how it treated suicide, how it just treated a lot of those things that go on in your head, and how much I could relate to this single character, and how similarly we thought in the case of, like, being depressed, right? How similar his depression was to mine that I have experienced. So, like, this idea of an existential depression where it's not so much like you're suicidal, but just the fact that you don't think that you're the most important person, even if you think you have some sort of value. So this was just such a thought-provoking book to me. It was such a comforting book to me, more so than any book that I've read this year. It had such a large impact on my life that I actually have the title of this book with a semicolon added, tattooed across my ribs. Like, I take this book seriously. It means a lot to me. So of course, I'm going to find it thought-provoking. Book number 4, I believe we're at 4, is going to be the Wicked and the Divine graphic novel series. So this one was very thought-provoking to me because it is about a god cycle where every 90 years a set of 12 gods is reborn, and then they survive for 2 years. After 2 years, they die. And what I found so thought-provoking of this was the concept of gods, who could be a god, why they became a god, and then just what was happening with their cycle. Like, why was their cycle working the way it was? What was the secrets being hidden by that old lady? And it made my head just wonder about so many things. Like, I had so much fun with this series because I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I was just like so obsessed with trying to figure out the mystery of why things were happening the way they were. And because it was gods, it wasn't always the easiest thing to understand their motivations. But it was fun all the way through, and I definitely thought about it quite a lot. So the number 5 is going to be The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. This is her book in which she wrote fairy tales that have relation to the Grishaverse. Basically, if you grew up in the Grishaverse, you probably heard these fairy tales. There's like 6 different fairy tales, each coming from a different region that you may become familiar with if you read the Grisha trilogy and the Six of Crows duology, and I loved all of them. I think my favorite was the very last story, but I loved every single one of them. I loved the idea that when you were going into this, you were going in with a stipulation that that happy ending that you always come to expect with most fairy tales and Disney movies and that sort of thing is not what's going to happen here. It's going to be a twist. Not everything's going to be happy at the end of the day. Not everything's going to be that picture perfect idea that you had at the beginning of the tale. So I love just waiting for that moment where there would be a turn, where what I thought I might get wasn't what I was going to get. Because like, even though I knew that the most obvious answer wasn't the answer I was going to get, there was like a little thing in the back of my head like, ooh, that's where this is going, right? But I knew it wasn't, and just thinking about that was so much fun. And I think this is Leigh Bardugo's best work, to be honest with you. I think she did her best work right here, because a lot of the problems I have with her Grisha trilogy and her Six of Crows trilogy is that those twists that make the story bad, that make it heartbreaking, that make it bittersweet, don't feel as natural in her original trilogy and in her duology. They kind of feel forced because you know it should be there, but not natural, like it has to be there for the story to work. In this case, those twists have to be there. The story wouldn't be the same without them. But in her previous work, it just kind of felt like she had to put it in, because what kind of story isn't a story without someone dying or suffering, right? But this one felt so much more natural, and I just loved like thinking about it, thinking about when the twist was going to happen, what possible twist was going to happen, and how this story would derail and give us an honest fairy tale. Book number 6 is going to be A Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue by Mackenzie Lee. So this one made me think a lot. I have so many opinions about this book. I just have like so many like little theories, little things that I put together in my head that just make this book so much more fascinating to me than it would be if it was just a simple romance. This book is about a young lord named Monty, and he's going to go across the continent on his trip with his best friend Percy. They end up having to drag along his sister for part of it to drop her off at finishing school. Monty's bisexual. His father's not very happy that he's a rake and he just wants to party. Percy's a black Caribbean European man, and well, his sister is a female, so we know where that's going. So what I loved most about this book, and what really made me think, was we see these 3 different characters, right? We have a lord, we have a gentleman, a true, honest English gentleman who can play the violin, and then we have very smart, intelligent lady who could do anything, right? And in any other circumstances, a charming lord, a talented musician, a very intelligent lady, those would be all things praised, right? Those are things that you should acknowledge and love. But because of the society they lived in, those didn't matter because Monty wasn't loved for being charming. He was thought of as a rake, and he was beat up because he was bisexual. Percy, it didn't matter how smart he was. It didn't matter how intelligent he was. It didn't matter that he was this great musician and that he was this great gentleman, because at the end of the day, he was black. And that couldn't fly. And for the sister, it didn't matter that she was intelligent, that she was the next doctor, that she just had a brain that worked so fast that she could figure things out, that she was just such a magnificent genius because she was a lady. So she was meant to be pretty and to go to finishing school and knit things, right? And so I like seeing these three characters be just amazing people that would have been praised for all of the things that they're hated for in their society. And like, how messed up that is, right? Like, just how messed up that is. I was there for this book for these characters. These characters made me think, they made me wonder about things, and I loved every second that I was with these characters. I liked the conversations that they have. I liked that not everything was easy for each character, that they suffered from self-consciousness and from the society around them, and that they weren't mean-hearted, but they weren't perfect either. The last book that I'm going to mention, book number 7 that I'm going to mention being as thought-provoking for me in 2017, is going to be The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I think this was a very thought-provoking book for me, simply because it was such an atmospheric book that sometimes you could get lost in it. So you really had to like think about things so to avoid getting lost in the world that was created around you. It's not so much a plot-heavy book or a character-heavy book, but the world created is done so wonderfully that you have to keep your wits about you if you're gonna survive this book and get through it without just like suffering under some slumber sleep of magic, because this was just such a beautifully built world. I was so fascinated in figuring out more about the world, figuring out more about the Night Circus and how it worked, figuring more about like what kind of acts went on and like what did they do, and like just that sort of concept. I was so excited about this event, the Night Circus, and how wonderful it sounded that I couldn't wait to discover more. So I really thought a lot about it, and I think the only way you can survive this book is if you keep your wits about you, because Erin is going to try to trick you and pull you under this spell of what this beautiful thing called the Night Circus is, and you just got to think your way through it, otherwise you're going to get lost somewhere in there. So these were my top 7 thought-provoking books for this year. I like thinking about things. Like, it's one of my favorite things to do is to think. So for me, thinking about books just means that there's something in a book that intrigues me enough that it just sits in my mind for a little bit. I either want to pick it apart, I either want to put some meaning into it, I want to make parallels to something with this book. So do you have a specific type of book that you like to think about it? Like, what kind of books provoke your thoughts? I guess I'm asking. Is it a specific genre? Is it a specific conversation that you're looking for? Or can it just be any random book, and if that book makes you think something, you start thinking? So if you like what you're seeing here and you want to see more, click all those bunnies down below, and be sure to go check out Book Rose and her video on this topic. Goodbye, Internet.